Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Kamma daf Nun Gimel. Today's daf is sponsored by Ronit and Shlomo Aini in honor of the marriage of their daughter Tehillah to Niriah, and for Refuah Shlema to Lily Bat Victoria, and to all those injured, for the safe return of the hostages, and for the protection of our soldiers. Today's daf is sponsored by Suri Stern, Hakarat Tov Knafayim, an amazing organization that no one should ever need, but that everyone should know about, helping families through difficult baby deliveries, and their part of organization Neshama. Okay, we're going to get started with the bottom of Nun Bet Amud. I'll remind everybody about the Circle of Friends campaign. If you haven't taken care of it yet, this is, again, what helps us to be able to continue the daily learning. So please consider making some sort of donation to contribute. So we're going to start with Nafal Lifanav. What we have to deal with right now is something in the Mishna that wasn't so clear. I already kind of explained it when we learned it, but we're going to see that that's only one approach. So the Mishna, it's always a problem when you learn the Mishna. You don't want to give away everything the Gemara is going to talk about, but then you kind of see it in one way, and then it's sometimes hard to break out of it. But let's read it. So the Mishna had said, distinguish between two cases. We have somebody digging in the bore. We now explained already, according to Rashi, and you'll see where Rashi gets that from in the Gemara today, that it's somebody else. Okay, there's someone, not the owner of the bore, but someone else is digging in this well. Maybe someone even, let's say it's my well, I hired someone to fix it. They're making noise in the bore. An animal falls in because of the noise. If they fall lifanav, which we're going to have to explain what that means, then the owner of the bore, that's me, is going to be liable. If they fall la'acharav, backwards, something, we don't know how to define this word, then they're patur, then I am exempt. So now, and the assumption is they died in both cases. Why am I going to be exempt? In one case, I'm liable in the other. So Amarav, lifanav mamash, la'acharav, acharav mamash. Doesn't really help us, but what does this mean? All right, lifanav, really lifanav. La'acharav, really la'acharav, v'zeh bebol. Okay, that's the important term. He says, both cases, they fell into the pit. Well, isn't that obvious? Isn't that what we're talking about? Well, not necessarily. But according to Rav, both cases, the shor fell, the ox fell into the pit. But what happened? As I mentioned when we learned the Mishnah, I took Rav's explanation. When the shor fell, either it fell on its face, okay, face down, in which case the hevel killed the shor, and remember that's Rav. Okay, Rav l'tamei, I'll even continue one more line. We don't care about the impact. If it's the impact of the bore, that's the ground. The ground isn't owned by anyone because bore is in the public domain. So what if a bore is in a private domain? We'll get to that today, okay? And we'll get to that now because remember, we learned there's two types of bore. One, I could own the bore. Then I do own the ground, actually. But we haven't talked about that yet. We'll get there soon. So Russ says very simply. Basically, if you fall head first into the bore and the shor dies like that, it's obviously the hevel that killed the shor. If the shor falls feet first, lands on their feet, then it's not the hevel that killed the shor because it's all about the breathing, and the shor is much higher up in the bore. There's not as much, right? If we call these lethal fumes, that's, by the way, the translation I got from the Koran. That's how they define the hevel. It's a hard word to define. Lethal fumes. So the lethal fumes don't kill you if your head is up. So if you died, it must be from the chavatan, and you're not liable for the bore. The owner of the bore is not liable if the shor hits the ground. Again, it's a hard concept to understand because I just want to remind you what Rav says. Rav says the impact on the ground is impact on the ground. The ground is not mine. Of course, if it wasn't for me, the ground would have been much higher and the impact would have killed, which is strange. It's a very strange approach. But basically, Rav is saying the impact is not what killed, and therefore that's not the issue. Shmuel says, Bibor, bein milafanav, bein milacharav chaya. Now, Shmuel says something which seems to go directly against the Mishnah. He says it doesn't matter if you fall on your head. It doesn't matter if you fall on your feet. Either which way, the owner is going to be liable. Now we're going to have to figure out, right? And that makes perfect sense with what Shmuel says. Shmuel l'tamei damar lehevlo v'koshken l'chavato. He says it could be the hevel that killed the animal. It's also if it's the impact for obvious reasons. The impact is obviously on account of the person who dug the well, and therefore, of course, you're going to be liable. Either which way. Well, how does he read the Mishnah then? Because the Mishnah said, if you fall lacharav, you're exempt. So, by the way, they all seem to ignore the fact that it's because of the sound of the person making the noise. That doesn't seem to be a factor here. Later on, we're going to get to some question about that. But right now, they seem to just be saying that the Mishnah might mention it because of the kol kriya, but it doesn't really matter what caused it. So now they say the following. How do we have a case of the Mishnah where you fell la'acharav, which we thought meant on your feet? Shmuel says you're liable, and the Mishnah says you're exempt. Well, Shmuel cannot go against an explicit Mishnah unless he has a Tanaitic source to support him, or unless he explains the Tanaitic source differently. La'acharav is not what you thought. He's arguing with Rav. He says, if you say falling on your face or falling on your legs, I disagree with you about that distinction. But what's the Mishnah talking about? You tripped on the shor, tripped on the bore. But instead of falling into the bore, sometimes you trip and you fall next to where you are, not into the bore. But he tripped on the bore. Maybe he was trying to walk over the bore and fell onto the other side. Didn't actually fall in the bore, but fell onto the side of the bore and right outside the bore. Now, what he wants to say here is that's what the Mishnah is talking about. And when the Mishnah says the Baal bore is exempt, is because it's true the bore caused it, but it was kind of indirect, right? You tripped on that and hurt yourself on something else. So in that case, the Baal bore would be exempt. Okay, and then now we're going to go back to those words, vizeh bebor. When Rav said both cases, lefanav and lacharav bebor, now we understand why he said that. Because according to Shmuel, one is bor. Lifanav actually means, and now he's going to translate lifanav and lacharav in the Mishnah differently. Lifanav in the Mishnah means you fell into the bore. La'acharav means you fell outside the bore. Okay, so that's our distinction between lifanav and lacharav. When he says lifanav lacharav chayav, that's defining falling on your head and falling on your feet. But the Mishnah, when it used lifanav and lacharav, it meant something else. It meant falling in the bore or falling on the side of the bore. And that's why if you're on the side of the bore, the Baal bore is not going to be liable. So now we're going to bring a problem with, if we understand, Shmuel, according to Rav, lecharav and lefanav are all just, right, on your face or on your feet. So we're going to have a problem because, right, Shmuel can easily say, right, that lefanav and lecharav means in the bore and outside the bore. It could also mean on your face and on your feet. So, we're going to now have a Tanaitic source. So we're going to bring us a question on Rav. Bibol bein lefanav bein lacharav chayav. In the case of bore, whether you fall on your face or down, this is only going to work according to Shmuel, because it says here, if you translate bein lacharav bein lefanav, either which way, you're going to have a problem with Rav, because if you say bein lefanav bein lacharav chayav, in both cases you're going to be chayav. Remember, our Mishnah distinguished: one case you're chayav, one case you're patur. This source says in both cases you're chayav. And then you're going to say, okay, well, according to Shmuel, it's perfect. Our Mishnah meant fall in the bore, fall outside the bore. That's what we're going to make a distinction. This Braita means fall on your face, fall on your feet. Either which way, you're going to be liable. Whereas Rav, who says fall on your face, fall on your feet, you're not going to be liable either which way. You're only liable in one of the cases, is going to have trouble finding a case where lefanav and lacharav, he can't say lefanav and lacharav is in the bore, outside the bore. Nobody thinks you're chayav if you fall outside the bore. So how's he going to explain this Braita, which seems to say both lefanav and lacharav, you're going to be liable? So Shmuel, it fits perfectly with tiyuv to Rav, but it doesn't make sense according to Rav. So now we're going to have three possible explanations. And I'd say each one gets a little more creative than the previous. Kamma Rav Chisda. Mode Rav bebor b'reshuto dechayav. And this I kind of made a bit of an allusion to before. Even though we've been saying all along that Rav says it's the hevel, it's the lethal fumes of the bore that you're liable for, not the ground, because the ground doesn't belong to you. What if the bore is in your domain? Remember, we talked about a bore that could be in your domain, like my neighbor, right? Where they open their yard for you to walk through. It's open to the public, but there's a bore there that belongs to them. Now, if you fall and hit the ground there, who does the ground belong to? You. So it's your ground that hurts someone, right? Rav's whole theory is if it's in the public domain and it's the ground, the impact that hurts, well, the ground doesn't belong to you. Right? Karka olam, that's what we say. The karka belongs to the world. But the land that's in your house belongs to you. So if you make your yard a place where everyone can walk through, but you have a bore there that's still yours, what did we say? You're liable for that bore. And according to this, we're now going to say Rav will even make you liable for death by impact because the ground is yours. So that's what Rav Chisda says. When it says bein lefanav, bein lacharav, if the animal falls in and dies, whether they hit head first or feet first, they're going to be liable. That's in a case where it's bore in your own domain. And our Mishnah was talking about bore in the public domain. So let's read it inside. So bor b'reshutho dechayav. Even Rav agrees, Modeh Rav. He agrees with Shmuel, or he agrees, right, about the impact. That in the case where the bor is in your domain, the impact kills the shor, the balabor, the owner of the bor is responsible. Why? Mishum de'amrle mimanavshach. Because you could say either which, any way you look at it, you're going to be liable. Ibahav lamet havlatidachu. If it's from the hevel, well, the hevel is your own. If it fell from the impact, also the impact is yours because the ground belongs to you, the ground of the bor. That's explanation number one, which, by the way, is just interesting to think about. I'm wondering if everybody holds that way about Rav, because we haven't said that until now. Till now, we said Rav disagrees and thinks the impact doesn't kill. So the question is, does everyone agree with Rav Chisda or not? It's interesting to think about. Rabba Amar, we don't have an answer to that question, but it's an interesting suggestion. Rava, now here we start to get a little more creative. That's just, okay, that's a pretty standard case that the bor is in your domain, right? I mean, I don't know how often it is that people open their property for people to walk through, but still, it's a case we've seen many times. This one's going to be a little more creative. Rava, if you want to find a case where Rav could make you obligated, even if the animal landed feet first, and assuming we don't say it was in your property, or we don't think in your property Rav is going to be obligated for the impact. So if Rav only thinks hevel, how could we have a case where you died from the hevel? B'mitapeh. It's where the animal flipped over inside the bor. It'd have to be a wide enough bor that the animal could flip over. Dinafal a'apeh. First they fell on their face. V'ithapech v'nafal agabeh, and then flipped over and landed on their feet. Right? In other words, and then the hevel, the lethal fumes, got into the, right? He breathed in the lethal fumes while he was upside down. Even though right now he's right side up, we're going to make you obligated. Well, that's creative. Here comes third creative answer. Rabbi Yosef Amar, Hacha b'niskei bor b'shor askina. Now, when we talk about a shor falling into a bor, we assume that what happened? The shor got killed from falling into the bor. But now we're going to say, oh, no. It's talking about something entirely different. It's talking about a shor that this Breita, in other words, our Mishnah was talking about a shor that falls into the bor and dies. The Breita you quoted, where it said, Bein lefanav, bein lacharav chayav, you're always going to be chayav, either which way the animal falls in, is actually talking about damage caused by the shor to the bor when it falls in. Meaning, well, we've seen this before, Mainiu, Shev Ishit Meimav, that the shor was very dirty. The shor falls in, doesn't matter whether it's head first, doesn't matter whether it's feet first. If the shor was full of dirt that ruined the water in the cistern, well, then basically we have a problem. The shor is going to be liable. It doesn't matter, right? If the shor dies, it's going to make a difference head first, feet first. If the shor damaged the well, the water in the well, it's not going to make a difference how the shor fell. In this case, the shor doesn't die at all. The balabor is in chayav. It's a matter of the responsibility of the owner of the shor. Now, why you would have to tell us this, it would be a good question. Who would think that there would be a distinction? But perhaps because of the distinction in the reverse case, where the animal dies on account of the bor, we want to say if it's the reverse, though, that the animal caused the damage by falling into the bor and ruined the bor, then it wouldn't make a difference. Okay, so we have three ways of understanding that source according to Rava. According to Rav, each is a bit creative and out there, I would say, although the first one maybe makes a lot of sense. And again, something that needs to be tested, right? Does anyone say this anywhere else? Tane Rav Chananya l'siyu eloha. Now Rav Chananya brings a Breita to support Rav. And let's read this Breita, and you'll see that it really seems to support Rav's reading. V'nafal ad shipol derech nefila. If you remember, it says, you dig a bor or you open a bor, and then it says, v'nafal shama shor or chamor. That's the famous shor v'lo kelim, shor v'lo adam, chamor v'lo kelim. So now they say v'nafal. What is the word v'nafal? We already darshan this. Ad shipol derech nefila, right? That's what Rav says. It has to fall the typical way of falling. Mikan amru, from here they learned, nafal lefanav mikol chayav. From here they learned, even if you fall because of some sound of this person in the well, you're still chayav. But lefanav only la'acharav mikol chayav patul v'zeh bebol. Okay, that seems pretty clear. It says Rav because it's saying both lefanav and la'acharav happen in the bor. You fall into the bor, not on the side of the bor. And la'acharav, you're going to be patur, which sounds, which is obviously meaning if you fall on your feet, you're going to be exempt. The owner of the bor is going to be exempt if the shor falls on its feet. Okay, so that was basically a big machlok at Rav and Shmuel. what lifanav and lacharav in the Mishnah means, something entirely different according to Rav and according to Shmuel. Amar nafal lifanav mikol kriya chayav. Now we're going to get back to this case of someone's making noise in the bore. It causes the shor to fall in. Now, causes is the important word. This is what we call grama b'nezikin. Grama means that the person did indirect damages because they made a noise that caused the shor to fall in, and then the shor got hurt by the bore. And right, there's two people here that cause the damage, and that's going to be the topic for the rest of today. When there's joint damages by two people, and we've discussed this before already, but one of them can't pay, okay, and that's what's going to happen here. So they say, if nafal mikola kriya chayav ba'amai nema koreh garem le. Why do we say, okay, let's say it's Ruth's bore and she hired someone, or maybe someone else for whatever reason was inside the bore doing some work and they're making noise. Why is Ruth fully reliable? There should be, right? Let's say it's Yael who also, right? She was in the bore. She should be liable. Rav Shimi bar Ashi, Hamane Rabbi Natan. So now they say, and by the way, even if you say, let's assume that Yael, who is sitting in the bore, made the noise, only is grama, indirect damages. So we can't make her liable, but Ruth should claim maybe I only have to pay 50% of the damages because it wasn't fully my fault. So who does this go? According to Rabbi Natan, and this is something we saw before, and we're really going to see this much more as we go on. De Amar Baal Habor Hezeka Ka'avid. Rabbi Natan says, Baal Habor really did the damages. And it's obviously Ruth's fault. She dug this pit. If it weren't for that, there would be no damages. And maybe you could say that the one in the pit is actually liable, but Rabbi Natan's position is, and we're going to see this inside, and we've seen it before already, that when two people are liable for damages, but one can't pay for whatever reason, or can't pay fully, the other one compensates and completes the payment. So in this case, theoretically, maybe it's 50-50, both are liable, but since the one who was in the bore at the time, who was making the noise, is only grama indirect damages, they only did, and you don't pay for that, Ruth has to compensate the rest. So now, obviously, if the bore belonged to the person who's the digger or who's in the bore, obviously they're going to have to pay full damages anyway. In any case, the owner has to pay full damages. This is only a case where there's someone else in the picture. So now they say it must be that this Mishnah follows Rabbi Natan. And now we're going to see Tanya. Now, hopefully, you'll remember this case. Shor shedachafet chaviro labor. So a shor pushes another shor into a bore. Okay, so let's take names. We have the bore is Ruth's, as we said before. We have Yael, this time has a shor. Okay, she's got the shor who pushes Naomi's shor into the bore. Okay, so we have Yael's shor boring, pushes the ox of Naomi into Ruth's pit. So now we have two people responsible. Shor was pushing, and the bore caused the damage, right? So according to Kamma, Bala shor chayav, Bala bor patur. So Kamma thinks that only the owner of the shor is liable. Okay, because it's really the shor's fault for goring. That goring caused the death. Bala shor is chayav. Bala bor is exempt. Ruth is actually exempt in this case. Rabbi Natan Omer, no, it's joint. Bala shor mishalem mechza or Bala bor mishalem mechza. Okay, that's not the important thing yet. This is just the beginning. So they split it 50-50. Okay, so according to, in this case, this simple case, where Yael's shor gores Naomi's, shor falls into the bore, Naomi's ox dies in Ruth's pit, they're going to have to split it 50-50. But we have a problem, because it says in another bright, Rabbi Natan Omer, Bala bor mishalem shlosha halakim, ubala shor revi'ah. In a different bright, Rabbi Natan says, the owner of the bore has to pay 3/4. Ruth has to pay more than Yael. She pays 3/4, Yael only pays 1/4. So how do we resolve that? One says 50-50, one says 1/4, 3/4, and it's the same person speaking. How can we possibly explain that? Well, lo kasha, ha betam, ha bemuad. Okay, I'm going to pull up the chart. This will hopefully help you visualize the machloket here. We're now going to see, we're on the second sheet already. Okay, so we're now going to have, no, sorry, we're on the first, my mistake, bottom of the first part. Okay, so we have this contradiction. How do we resolve it? So now we're going to say the first braita that said half is because it was a shor muad. Now we have to add in the whole element of shor muad. Now, shor muad is obviously only going to affect Yael, the owner of the ox. Ruth, it's irrelevant whether the ox was, or we'll see, it's going to become relevant to her, but in the world of bor, muad is not relevant. So we're going to have a case where the shor is a shor muad, was forewarned, has to pay full damage. So the shor is going to pay the full damage, and the bor is going to pay the full damage, but each shares in it, so they're each going to pay half-half. That works perfectly. In the case of a shor tam, we're going to end up that the Baal shor only pays half of what they should have paid, half of the half, which is a quarter. And then the Baal bor is going to have to pay the 3/4. And here's where we're going to talk about compensating. But we haven't explained this all yet, even though we learned this before. So you might know it, but now we're going to go in and try to explain it. And first they're going to say this, like we don't understand this shor tam case. And then they're going to explain the shor tam case. So now they're going to say the following. Bitam mai kasavar. What are you holding in the shor tam case? What did Rabbi Natan hold? Kasavar. Now, there's going to be two approaches. Either they each really owe full damages, but they end up having to share. So Ruth really owes 100%, and Yael really owes 100%. And then what would you say in a shor tam case? Well, if theoretically they both owe full damages, then what's going to happen? Well, then now they share the damages 50-50. But if Yael's ox is a shor tam and only pays half, so she'll pay half of a whole, and then she'll pay 50%. And that's not what it says. It's a quarter. So let's read that inside. Really, each is fully responsible for the damages. And therefore, then palga. So each should then pay 50%. Because what we do is the 50% of the partnership is also counts as the 50% of taking it from a muad to a tam. Right? A muad pays full, tam pays half. So in any case, Yael's going to pay half. It's the same half. And then she pays half and should split it 50-50 with Ruth. Because it's not like she's paying any more than she needs to, because she really did need to pay full. It's only because she's partners with Ruth. And it happens to be that she's a shor tam as well, but it's the same half damages she's going to pay. She's not paying more than she needs to. But if you say, Hai palga hezek, and if you say each one actually really only caused half of the damage. So each one's really only responsible for half. Right? You follow the difference. You could either say they're each fully responsible, but end up dividing it between the two of them. Or you could say they're each only half responsible. Now, if they're only half responsible, then what would come out? So if Yael, it's really the point is Yael. Yael has an ox that's a shor tam. So if she's half responsible, she's responsible for 50%. But of that, since she's a shor tam, she only pays 25%. So she should pay 25%. That makes sense. Okay? But so Hi avid palga, right? Bala bor mishalem palga, ubala shor revia. Well, then Ruth should pay half because she only owed half. Shouldn't have to pay 3/4. And Yael should pay a quarter. And Naomi loses out in this case, right? The idach riva mafsid. And the nizak, the one whose shor fell into the pit, they have no choice. Because why? We say, and nobody needs to pay that extra quarter because nobody owes it really. Because Ruth already paid her 50%. According to second option, she only is obligated 50%. And and Yael only has to pay a quarter because it's a shor tam. So Amar Rava, don't ask that question against Rabbi Natan. Rabbi Natan, Dayanahu v'nachilum kadidina. He was a Dayan and he really knew what he was talking about. La'olam kasavar haikula zekavid. This was all, by the way, we haven't yet explained Rabbi Natan. This was all we got here because we wanted to say our Mishna was like Rabbi Natan, that one compensates for the other. We haven't gotten to that yet, and which was what we're going to get to right now. But how did we get there? Because we said one source says 50-50. Rabbi Natan says one source says a quarter, 3/4. What could be the difference? We said tam and muad. How does that work? So now we're trying to explain the tam case. How do we get to the quarter, 3/4? The half works perfect. But this doesn't make any sense. So now they're going to say, really, really, they both have to pay full damages. Now, what was our problem? We said, if they really have to pay half damages, Yael gets down to half in two ways, but she's still only at half. In other words, she really owes full damages. So because she's a shor tam, she'll pay half. And also because she shares it with Ruth, she'll pay half. Either which way, she pays half. Well, no. Right? Why wouldn't Yael be paying half? Mishum da amale bala shor la bala bor. Because Yael could go to Ruth and say the following. Shutafate mayahane. What did this partnership help me? The fact that my shor gored this other shor and caused the death, but in your bor, and we're partners basically, didn't help me at all. Because if my shor did all the damages, I would have to pay 50%. Now that my shor is a short time, well, I still have to pay 50%. That makes no sense. If my shor is a short time and just gore by itself, I pay 50%. Now that I did it together with you, I still have to pay 50%. What did it help me that we're both part of the damages? So basically, comes Rabbi Natan and says, therefore, in order to say, oh, the partnership does have relevance, basically, we're going to drop Yael down to 50% to 50%, even though she really owed. So now we're going to do it like this. She really is fully responsible, as is Ruth. They're both fully responsible. But we drop her down to half because she's a short time. And then because she's a partner, we do half of that. Okay, so, or you could say it the opposite. Because she's a partner, she really only is, in the end, has to pay 50%. Of that 50%, well, she's a short time, so she only pays 50% of that. It's like getting two, when the no double sales, you have a sale, you can't use another one also, right? This is saying, no, you get both. Okay, so now, but what's the problem here? But then we said, okay, fine, that makes sense. We get that. But Ruth, why should Ruth pay 3/4? She should only pay half. Why should she pay any more than she's supposed to pay? So again, now we did say, if you remember, that she really did all the damage as well. They're both fully responsible for the damages. So because of that, right? Why don't we just say idach rivenafsi, that Naomi loses out? Mishum da amarle bala shor. Now it's a little tricky. The bala shor here is Naomi. In the previous, the bala shor was Yael. But the one who got damaged, that's basically Yael's going to pay 1/4, and Ruth wants to pay half. And Naomi comes to Ruth and says, "Hey, you can't pay me half." She can say, "Ana torai bibirach eshkachte." I found my shor in the end in your bore. Like all the evidence leads to you. At katalte, you're responsible for the death of my shor. My de'ile lishtalum meheach mishtalamna. Now, because remember, this approach says really they're all fully responsible. So she says, I get that you don't want to pay the whole thing because someone else pushed the shor, right? Yeah, Yael's shor pushed my shor into your bore. I understand you don't want to pay full damages, but look, I found the shor in your bore. You theoretically are fully responsible. Whatever Yael's going to pay, I won't make you pay in addition. So I'll deduct that from what you owe me. But mine's a late. But whatever she's not going to pay, you must compensate me. And that's the way we answer Rabbi Natan in the end. And that is the key line. Because what Rabbi Natan says is there could be joint responsibility for damages. But if for whatever reason one isn't paying, and now that who remembers where we started, we had the person inside the bore that was making the noise. That person theoretically is responsible and should share the responsibility. But when they can't pay because they don't need to pay because it's grama and you're not obligated for indirect damages, the Baal bor has to compensate the entire amount. They have to fill in. Okay, and that was where we got to. Now that we're in this Rabbi Natan, Rava, and some others are going to bring all sorts of other cases where we're going to apply this machloket Rabbi Natan and the rabbis. Amar Rava, hiniach even al pi bor. Okay, so until now we had shor and bor. Shor pushes, bor collects, right? Causes the damage or falls into the bor. Now we're going to have someone who gets injured, let's say even an animal, but by an even that someone leaves and falls into a bor of someone else's. Now, even is bor, it's a tolada of bor, remember, and bor. So we had shor and bor, now we're going to have bor and bor. So somebody leaves a stone, the animal trips over the stone, falls into the pit, and dies. So now, bashor v'nitkava v'nafal b'bor, banu l'machloket, Rabbi Natan v'Rabbanan, same exact machloket. The person who left the stone is going to be liable, and the person who fell into the pit is going to be liable, right? And in this case, right, so again, the rabbis are going to say it's all the owner of the stone, just like he said. I'm sorry, what, right? The rabbi said, I get confused now. Sure, because we're focused on the rabbis. They said, Bala bor patur, right? It's all the shor. It's all the one who caused the whole thing to start. So we would say it's the person who left the stone is fully responsible. And Rabbi Natan would say 50-50. Now here there's no shor tam, shor muad, because it's not a shor, it's a stone. So Pshita, the Gemara says this is pretty obvious. Why would you have to say that they argue in this case, Rava? It's obvious they argue. To which he says, well, not necessarily. That's in the case that we just had with the bor and the shor. Naomi could say to Ruth, the Bala bor, Ruth could say to Yael, the owner of the boar could say to the owner of the ox that pushed, "Ilav bira didi, Torah didach havakatele." When you gored the ox, you theoretically could have killed that other ox just by goring, without a pit. It's possible you could have caused the death of that by yourself, your animal. So therefore, you have to be responsible. Aval hacha, but in this case, matze amale baal even lebaal labor. But this case, theoretically, maybe the owner of the stone could say, "What is my role in this at all?" Because ilav bira didach. Let's say Yael put down the stone. Yael could say, "If it weren't for your boar, avdin didi ba'hava avdin." People trip on stones; they don't die. It doesn't cause death usually, unless it's some crazy situation. But you trip on a stone, you trip and you fall on the floor, and you have a mitkaba. If he would have tripped on my stone, nafa v'kai, he would have fallen and stood up a minute later or 5 minutes later, wherever we would have gotten hurt. But you don't die from that kind of thing. And therefore, you might have thought that in this case, Yael could say, "Hey, it's all on your roof. It's your boar that caused the death." Whereas when Yael's ox gored Naomi's ox, you can't say, "Oh, well, that wouldn't have killed." We know that goring could kill. Da'amrle, right? Kamashmalan. So therefore, comes to teach you when Rava says they also argue here. It's to teach you the ilav even lav anapalabir. This is like the mouse and the hole, and right. Remember that whole thing. It's true that it couldn't have been killed by your stone just without my boar, but it also wouldn't have fallen. The ox wouldn't have fallen into my boar if it weren't for tripping on your stone. So you and me were equally responsible, and you can't get out of this. And that's what Rava is coming to say again, according to Rabbi Natan. Itmar. Now moving to Amud Bet. So we had shor and bor. We had bor and bor. Now we're going to get to two shors who gore together. But the two shors are not equal. One is a regular shor, and one is a shor psulei hamukdashim. We're going to have two cases of psulei hamukdashim today. One is going to be, and here the Gemara, okay, here shenakhu, they gored each other. In this case, it's the shor that gores, and the other case is going to be the shor that gets injured. But just so you don't get confused later when we see the same term. Shor psulei hamukdashim is a shor that was used for a sacrifice, but then became disqualified. In this case, in parentheses, it says which type are they talking about here? It's a bechor that can't be redeemed. Okay, a bechor, a firstborn, goes to the Kohen. The Kohen's supposed to sacrifice it. But if it gets a blemish, the Kohen can't sacrifice it, and it really becomes the Kohen's, except that it can never be redeemed, and it always retains its sanctity. Because of that, if it gores, it's basically considered shor of hekdesh, and we already learned shor of hekdesh doesn't pay damages. Remember, we had a whole machloket about that. But shor of hekdesh doesn't pay damages. So now we're going to say the following. If you have two shors, and again, it's the same situation. One doesn't pay damages, right? Because shor psulei hamukdashim is exempt. So is the other one fully responsible, partially responsible? What do we do? So pull up again the chart. It'll help you. So now we're on the second side. Now we have the following. Abaye, Amar, Mishalim, we're going to have two opinions, Abaye and Ravina, and we're going to have two versions of their machloket. Okay, so we're in version number 1. Abaye Amar Mishalem Chatzi Nezek. So the shor that is liable for damages pays half because there's another shor, right, that owes the other half, even though they don't pay. Ravina Amar Mishalem Ravina Nezek. Ravina says they only pay a quarter damages. So now it's confusing because if we go that Abaye is the rabbis that you only pay your half and you don't have to compensate the other half, then what's Ravina saying that you only pay a quarter? So how are we going to explain this? We're going to have two ways to explain. That's what Hatza'ah 1 and Hatza'ah 2 are. Two suggestions to what the machlokes between Abaye and Ravina is. Hava habitam. They're both talking about a short tam. And then Hake Rabbanan, Hake Rabbi Natan. So what happens? Now Rabbi Natan says you have to compensate. So Abaye, who says half damages. Now, if two shvarim killed this other shor, and they were both short tams, they only have to pay half damages altogether, which means really each one pays a quarter. But since the shor psulei hamukdashim can't pay his quarter, so Abaye says the other one compensates, and that's Rabbi Natan. And Ravina says no, holds like the rabbis. Only one of them pays because the other one doesn't pay, the other one doesn't compensate. So theoretically, they should have paid half, but they only pay a quarter here, and that would fit perfectly. Or Ibai Dema, alternatively, you could say Ha v'ha k'Rabbanan. They both hold like the rabbis that there's no compensating, but Ha b'tam, Ha b'muad. Each was talking about a different. They don't argue. They were talking about a different case. Abaye says you pay half nezek if it's a muad, because only the person who owns the shor, who's a regular shor, has to pay, the other one doesn't. So he pays his half damages and the other one doesn't. And Ravina says, no, it was a shor tam. And therefore, they each are supposed to pay half. And therefore, right, they're each supposed to pay half from the beginning. Shor tam drops them each down to a quarter. And since we're holding like the rabbis, the one who own, right, each one only pays their part. The psulam u'ktashim pays 0 because they're exempt, and the other one pays a quarter. So that's the first version. Ikada amre, some people have a different version of their machloket. Abai amar chatzi nezek, that's the same, but it's going to mean something different possibly. And Ravina amar kule nezek. Ravina says, actually, they pay full damages. So now you're only going to be able to explain Rabbi Natan if you hold by Ravina, if you hold by Rabbi Natan, because how on earth would you get to full damages when there's a partnership? So either we say, again, we're going to have two explanations. Ha veha b'muad, both are talking about a shor muad, where you're supposed to theoretically pay full damages. And then Abayu says the owner of the first shor only pays half is because, right, ha ki Rabbanan. He holds like Rabbanan that you only pay your half, you don't have to compensate for the other person. Ve ha ki Rabbi Natan, the second owner has to pay the full damages because they say when the other one can't pay, you compensate for them. Ibait ema, second option within the second reading of the machloket. Hava hake Rabbi Natan, both agree with Rabbi Natan and both think that you're supposed to compensate. But what's the difference then? Ha b'muad, ha b'tam. The one who says, Ravina, who says full damages, was talking about a case where it was a shor muad. And then again, just like in the first version, the second explanation, we said they don't actually argue. It's just there we said it was all the rabbis. Here we said it's all Rabbi Natan. And then it's just a different shor tam, shor muad. Abai is going to say half damages because he says, oh, the shor was a shor tam, and that's why we only pay half damages. But of course, one has to compensate for the other. And Ravina says, no, you have to compensate for the other, but it was a shor muad, and that's why you have to pay full damages. Okay, so, and as again, sorry, I didn't say, it's not that Ravina says, no, Ravina just says it was a different case. It was a shor muad case. Okay, so those are two different versions of what the machloket was, and two different versions within each of what they each hold by in this machloket, Rabbi Natan and the rabbis. So just to review, we talked about, okay, before we get to our more complicated case, we talked about a shor and a bore sharing responsibility. We talked about a bore and a bore sharing responsibility, right? A stone that drops someone, causes someone to slip into the pit. And then we talked about two shvarim, but one is obligated and one is not. And in all of them, we showed in each case the machloket between Rabbi Natan and the rabbis. Now we get to a different case where we have 3 causes of damages. Okay, so here goes. Amar Rava. It's again Rava. Shor v'adam. You have a person and an ox who both push this person, let's say, because we're going to see a whole bunch of things about people, or an animal, okay, into a bore. So let's assume they push a person into a bore. So we now have 3 people, 3 things that are obligating. The owner of the shor, the owner of the person themselves who did the pushing, and the owner of the bore. Okay, so if we talked before, Yael shor and Tamar push Naomi, let's say, into a pit. Okay, and the pit is owned by Ruth. So we have Ruth, we have Yael, and we have Tamar, who are all theoretically responsible. So now we're going to talk, and this is a great review of lots of sugyot that we've seen. We're going to talk about, because shor, adam, and bor all have unique characteristics to them, unique areas where one is liable, one is not liable for certain things. So le'inyan nizikim, when it comes to the damage they caused, kulan chayavim, they're all fully responsible because it was a joint effort by all 3 of them. Le'inyan arba'ad dvarim, if you talk about 4 things, remember the ripoy, the tsar, shevet, ripoy, and boshet, that only people who damage are liable for. If your animal damages in that way, or your bore damages, you're not liable to pay all those payments, okay, if they damage a person. So this is why the example seems to be more a person, although we'll see, it talks about all different things that might happen. So, arba'at dvarim, or dmei vladot, if you remember, the dmei vladot, if it was a woman who was pregnant and she miscarries as a result of falling into this bore now that the shor and the person pushed her into, well, the vladot is only liable if it's the person who damaged. So a person damages. Remember, that was ki natsu anashim, 2 men are fighting. So the adam will be liable, but the shor and the bor are going to be exempt. Adam chayav v'shor v'bor patur. Okay, that's what they say. Li'inyan kofer, if, right, the person died, now the owner of the shor is liable to pay this ransom payment. But we don't have such a thing by a person who kills will get the death penalty, right? And if they don't get the death penalty, they don't have a kofer payment. And the owner of the bore is exempt because remember, if somebody falls into a bore and dies, you're not liable in bore because the person should have been paying attention. So here it's interesting because, right, in this case, it'll be the owner of the shore that's responsible because they should have been paying attention. They couldn't because they were pushed, but they were pushed by the owner of the shore, and therefore, I'm sorry, by the shore, therefore the owner of the shore is going to be responsible. So, linyan kofer ushloshim shel eved, if it was an eved knani, and there's that knas payment that an owner of an ox has to pay, that's only for the owner of an ox who causes the damage to a slave, but not a person, not a boar. There's no unique halacha there. So again, the person would be liable, the death penalty, wouldn't have to pay a payment, and the boar wouldn't be liable at all. So shor chayav adam bor ptulim. Le'inyan kelim ushor psulei mukdashim. I told you we get back to the shor psulei mukdashim from a different angle. We'll talk in a minute. If it was a kli that was broken in there, we already know shor and adam are liable for kli, but bor is exempt from kelim. That's going to be the next sugya that we'll probably just start tomorrow. And shor psulei mukdashim, now this time it's not the shor psulei mukdashim, the gores, it's the shor psulei mukdashim that fell into the boar. If it was a shor psulei mukdashim that falls into a boar, also the boar is patur. If it was the shor and adam, we're going to have to pay for the damages for that shor, but the boar owner is going to be exempt. Now, we don't know this halacha yet. This is the only one we haven't yet learned. We're going to learn it right now. How do we get that there's a unique exemption? And that's basically what we have left in today's talk. How do we know there's a unique exemption by boar if you kill a shor psula, if your boar, some shor psula mukdashim, one that again was supposed to be used for a sacrifice but got disqualified. Now, what if it falls into your pit? You're exempt from damages. If your shor kills that shor or a person kills that shor, they're liable, but not if the shor fell into a pit. Seems like a very unique halacha, and they're going to explain why, where we get it from. My time, before we continue, I want to read you two psukim. This is important, and I put them at the bottom of the sheet. One is by bor and one is by shor, where the same words appear, and this is going to be our back and forth right now until we finish the daf. It says by bor that the owner bala bor yishalem kesef yashiv the ba'alav. We've seen this pasuk a bunch of times. V'hameti yelo, and whatever this means, it sounds like, and the dead will be for him. Okay. Now, in Shmot Perek Kavala pasuk lamivav, two pasukim later, when it talks about shor, it says, "O kinodaki shor nagachu mitmol shel shom." If he's a shor mu'av, v'leish merenu ba'alav, he pays shor tachat shor in place of the shor. V'hameti yelo. It also says the words v'hameti yelo. So the first thing we're going to do is say v'hameti yelo in bor comes to teach you. You're only liable to pay, because that was the beginning of the pasuk, the owner of the boar has to pay, b'misha hamet shelo, to someone who the dead carcass is his. Now, shor psulei mukdashim isn't fully owned. The person can't benefit from it. There's all sorts of things you can't do with it. Can't give it to your dog, for example. Yatsa zeh she'en hamet shelo. So this one, it's the mate isn't theirs. Since the mate is not theirs, you don't have to pay damages for boar. Now, that's unique for boar. Now they say, wait a minute. Wait, Rava said this whole statement. He was the one who said this and said the psulei mukdashim is patur for boar and not for anything else. So now they say, wait, you're going to say Rava said that and he must have learned it from this pasuk, but Rava had a whole question on how to read that pasuk and how we were supposed to understand it. Goodbye, Rava. Rava asked, shor psulei mukdashim shenafal lebor mahu. If a shor psulei mukdashim falls into a pit, what's the halach? Do we say, hi v'hameti yelo b'mish hamet shelo yatzazah she'en hamet shelo, which is exactly what we just said. Do we learn it this way? That it comes to exclude someone who the dead body doesn't belong to them because it's sanctified. O dilma v'hameti yelo, or maybe v'hameti yelo, you might remember this. It's to teach you a different halacha. Leba'alim metaplim b'nevei laudata. Do you remember what this means? This means that if Naomi's ox kills, if Ruth's ox kills Naomi's ox, who gets the dead carcass? Naomi. What if the dead carcass goes down in value? Tough luck on Naomi. Okay, because Ruth only pays, as we've seen this many times. Let's say Ruth killed Naomi's ox. It was worth 200. Now it's only worth 50, but it is worth 50. So Ruth pays the 150. And even if it goes down to 30, it doesn't matter. She still pays that 150 of what it was at the time of the act. So now, isn't Vamei yellow coming in? So that was Rava's question. Does Vamei yellow come to exclude psulei mukdashim and bor? Or does it come to say, and this, by the way, is across the board in all damages, that the nizak, the one who's damaged, gets the nevela in the end. The carcass is theirs, and the other person just pays the difference. So they say, oh, don't ask that question, because batar debaya hadar pashta. Rava asked that question at some point, but then he answered it, and he said it must be coming to teach our halacha about the psulei mukdashim. So then they say, if that's the case, so but it's obvious he also holds that. So where does he get that from? And that's why I set up already. There's two psukim that say the same thing. He learns it from shor and from there to everything else. So the nevela issue is learned from that. So now the Gemara asks the obvious question, which is, and I'll add the words. In other words, why are you saying hamei yellow of shor is coming to say the nevela, and from there we're going to extend it to all other types of damages? And bor de mafkele lemishamet shelo. I'm sorry, hamei yellow de bor, but hamei yellow by bor is only lemishamet shelo, and to teach you right just by bor. There's this unique exception that shor psulam ukdashim is not included. You're not going to have to pay damages for that. Ipuchana, you could flip it, and then if you flipped it, you would say, oh, shor psulam ukdashim, nobody pays damage for, and or perhaps you could. And you end up with the nevela maybe is only by bor. Okay, there's a lot of possibilities you could do, or you could say they're both for everything, or one is for one and one is for the. It's hard to understand. To which the Gemara says, and this will end with mistabra patur gabe bor ho'il upatar bo et hakelim. We have already something unique to bor. Bor is exempt from kelim, and that's going to be our next topic. If kelim vessels fall into the bor, the owner is exempt. Since that's the only place where there's some sort of big exemption, we're going to say if there's already a pasuk that teaches an exemption of shor psulam ukdashim, we're going to also say it's only by bor, and therefore that pasuk is by bor. The mei yellow of shor is to teach you about the nevela issue, that the nevela stays with the nizak, and the whole pchat nevela, the depreciation, is on the nizak and not the mazik. And then we're going to just extend that to everything else. To which the Gemara has one more question. Adraba. Wait a minute. Also by shor, there's an exemption. Chatzi nezek, right? There's a whole thing that a shor tam only pays half damages, to which they said that's not the same. But we don't have anywhere by shor where you're exempt from all the damages. Okay? You only have by bor that there's kalim that you just don't have to pay for a whole category of things. Whereas by shor, you might get half damages sometimes, but that's a half damage. You still have to pay damages. So if we're going to compare it to one or the other, say this, you're entirely exempt. If it's shor psulam ukdashim, we're going to say it must be by bor, where we also have some other complete exemption. Okay, we're going to end here for today. The whole next thing really starts and goes on to the next page about the machloket by kalim. We just said, right, bor is always exempt from kalim. We're going to see that Rabbi Yehuda actually says, which we've seen him before, that you're actually chayav in kalim for bor. What we did today was we had a whole machloket Rav and Shmuel about lefanav and lacharav and which one it meant, what the meaning of the Mishna was, and how we dealt with that other braita, and 3 explanations of that braita according to Rav. Then we went to the fact that why is the person in the bor not responsible for making the noise? We said, oh, that's because it's grama. And then the fact that the Baal bor has to compensate, that was all Rabbi Natan. And from there, we got into the whole thing about Rabbi Natan. And we went through a bunch of different scenarios where it's not just shor and bor, but shor and shor psulam ukdashim. We had bor, and then we had Adam, bor, and shor, that all 3 together caused the damages. And then we went through this whole list of what type of damages or things would one be liable for and not the others, or one be exempt from and not the others. And we had a whole good review of all sorts of sugyot we've seen before. And from that, we got off to explain shor psulam ukdashim. Where do we know that there's no obligation by bor if the bor attacks a shor psulam ukdashim and kills it? How do we know that there's no damages to be paid? And that was all because hamei yellow, and this is not a case where the mei yellow. And we had a whole thing. What about the balim taplim devela? And then we said, oh, that we learned from the shor pasuk. Why that one, not that one? That was our back and forth. Wishing everybody a good day and hoping for better news today. Keep hoping.